Well, Bill, this is an interesting experience for me. I've wanted to ask you questions like this for 25 years, but I was afraid to do it. I suspect, Bill, that many people that either read Shipmate or watch this interview know something about you, but I also suspect that they don't know much about the whole picture of Bill Koch. I guess I'm a little bit like the bumblebee. It aerodynamically shouldn't fly, but it does because no one told it can't. So I'm going to try to describe you very briefly for our people that are interested in the life of Bill Koch. For the past 33 years, Bill, you've been the chairman and the CEO of what I've called the Oxbow family of companies. And Oxbow is a recognized world carbon and minerals company. You market petroleum coke, which is a byproduct of the refinery process and used in energy. You have companies that are carbon and minerals related, such as a coal mine. You have a coal mine that's operating. You have another coal mine that's under production. You have an international sulfur company. I believe that your sulfur company ranks in top 3 in the world in marketing and production. You have natural gas fields, pipelines, compressor stations. You've owned power plants. You've built and purchased power plants, including geothermal plants that you've done from scratch. The bottom line is that you're a very, very highly recognized international businessman and entrepreneur. I think some people know, maybe more than that side of your life, that you also defended successfully in 1992 the America's Cup when you were given no chance as a neophyte in that race. And you were credited with introducing women to the America's Cup competition, both in your crew in 92 and then you underwrote the 1995 America's Cup. And then, of course, there's your collecting. People that are interested in collecting certain areas know that you have a successful, wonderful, world-class art collection that you've shared publicly. It's been in a number of major museums throughout the United States. You also have an unbelievable collection of Western artifacts. I believe in the most recent exhibit that you shared here in Florida at the 4Art Center, I understood that there were over 1 million artifacts, objects, costumes, guns, you name it, that you were sharing with the public. And then, of course, some people have learned more recently that you have an unbelievable world-class 1812 collection. So it's now public information that the Naval Academy is partnering with you, and you are providing virtually 1/3 of the exhibit that will be in Mahan Hall at the Naval Academy. And you also, incredibly and generously, on your own, offered to and did gift to the Naval Academy Foundation all the money that was necessary to put on this world-class celebration by the Navy. So let's begin with what I would call the obvious question. How did it come that you are a partner with the United States Naval Academy and also with the state of Maryland in putting on this celebration and recognition of the War of 1812?
Well, Roy, it's an extremely long story with a lot of interesting details, and it started off on a very simple quest that I had.
Which was?
Well, I've been looking for years for Captain Lawrence's sword, the captain of the Chesapeake. He's the guy, or the man, who died in the War of 1812 defending a ship, and he was the one, his dying words were, "Don't give up the ship," which became the motto of the American Navy. And the reason I am after his sword is because I'm a huge collector of his items, simply because he was one of my mother's ancestors.
And as I understand, having lived through it, your quest for that sword caused you to go to the Naval Academy and meet with the museum people to ask about it. Am I right?
Well, no. The first thing was that I called you up and said, since you're a great naval grad and a great proponent of the academy, I asked you if you could call them up and ask them if they have it in their museum. Lo and behold, you called me back and said, well, the Academy is willing to see you and show you all their stuff on Captain Lawrence.
I remember that well, and I remember on that visit, I went over to the museum and I took pictures of some art that they had, which was a picture in part of Captain Lawrence you had never seen, and a picture of Mrs. Lawrence you had never seen. And that piqued your interest, and you did make one of several trips down to the Academy, didn't you?
Well, I went down with you. You had to work your way through the bureaucracy, and you did a very good job of it. We went down and met the deputy superintendent. At the time was Bob Parsons. He showed us around, took us over to the museum, and I've forgotten Cheevers, wasn't it? That
I believe that's right.
Yeah, who
Mr.
had,
Cheevers.
Yeah, wonderful man, extremely knowledgeable, had laid out all the Lawrence things. Well, before that, they saved the Lawrence thing for the very last. They showed me the museum, toured me around. I got a chance to go meet Colonel Athens. Is it Akins?
You're right, and
Yeah.
he is the chairman of the Ethics and Leadership
That's
Department at the Academy.
Yeah.
I remember that very well, as the two of you pointed out the books on his shelves and you exchanged ideas and books. It was kind of fun to watch the two of you. You forgot everyone else was in the room.
Yeah, but what was nice about it, and I have it in the house, is he gave me a compass, and he called it a Morrow compass.
Yes.
And I put it on my desk. It's great.
That's the Admiral Stockdale compass.
That's right.
And you also, if I remember correctly, had the opportunity to meet and have one-on-one exchanges with midshipmen, men and women, and you had lunch with them, and of course you met Admiral Miller and spent time with Admiral Miller. I guess the question for you is, did you come away from the Naval Academy after these visits with an impression different than you had before you went down there?
Actually, I was amazed. I always thought of the Naval Academy as a very bureaucratic organization. And I thought that it was very regimented, but I was amazed at the diversity of the cadets. I was amazed at the diversity of the subject matters that were taught. I was extremely impressed with the student body and with the midshipmen with whom I had lunch, and with the staff. I thought it was a terrific organization, and one of the things that impressed me most about it is they were teaching these young men and women values, things that I think are very necessary in life: loyalty, dedication, ability to think problems through. They even put me on the simulator and see if I'd wreck one of the frigate that was on, and it was pretty interesting to steer. It was more difficult than to steer an America's Cup boat.
Well, and I probably shouldn't say this, but you did wreck it.
Of course I did.
Of course, they gave you 30-foot seas and 25 knots of wind and put you in Pearl Harbor.
They were putting me in my place. They did a good job.
Bill, I'd like to change subjects to philanthropy. My guess is that few people are aware that in 2012, Forbes magazine listed you in the top 25 most generous people in the United States giving to charity. And I recall very vividly during the America's Cup in '92, we had some sort of a catastrophe that occurred, and we were leaving the docks on our way out to join the crew. And you were the skipper, and they couldn't start without you. And it was a practice session, and as we got underway, the radio was on. And you said to the skipper, "Turn this around and take me back to the dock." And you plunged into your canvas bag, pulled out a check book, and you wrote a check. I'm not going to embarrass you, but I saw the check. It was a very, very generous check to the Red Cross, I think. And you gave it to this crew member when we came alongside the dock and said, "Get that to them." And then we took off. And it made an impression on me because we were relatively new friends at the time. I'd known each other for a few years. I have witnessed you as one of the most generous people that I have ever been acquainted with. And so my question to you is, what is it? What is it? Where do you get this generosity? What drives you to be as generous as you are?
Well, first of all, I'd say my twin brother David is far more generous than I am, but of course, he's the rich Koch brother, I'm the poor Koch brother. I know you're crying for me about that. I could see your tears. But anyway, my father was generous, and he was generous to organizations that he thought were doing good in his view of society and our world. And he taught that to his boys. Some of us are more generous than others, but that's natural. To me, I think the best investments we can make is in our children, because they're the future of the country, the future of the world. And if you could teach the kids to have good values, to get along with one another, to respect each other, and to think clearly and focus on reality versus on perception, the world would be a much better place. And it would be much better for them. We could solve a lot of problems if we ignored the perception or the myth of what you do and just concentrate on what the real issues are and how to solve those real issues using a scientific approach or scientific methodology so you could think clearly and logically about it.
Well, I imagine that there are people that would be reading this or watching it and they would say, wonder what Bill Koch gets out of this. But I think you just answered that question, certainly with regard for what you get out of sharing and being generous to the Naval Academy, because we all know that these young men and women that are in these various academies are certainly, they go in there knowing what they're doing, don't they?
Yes, they do.
It makes a difference.
Well, I must say that, so education to me is highly important. I love art. So I've been generous to some museums and had an art foundation, primarily to show art in remote areas of the country where people normally can't see the great masterpieces that there are in the Metropolitan in New York, for example. And then the other thing, of course, there's some health issues that affect my family. It could affect me, of course. And it's good to well, maybe I do that for enlightened self-interest reasons. But we all want to be healthy. We all want to be active. We want to prolong our day of reckoning and enjoy life as much as possible. And the best way to do that is to be physically and mentally healthy.
In listening to you, Bill, I realized that I was remiss in ignoring your personal side. You have 6 wonderful children that you deeply love, and I don't know how you do it with your schedule, but you find time to mentor and to be a great father. I know that's a really important part of your life. And I'd like to just go back to this art question for a second and talk about collecting. 25 years or 22 years ago or whatever, when I first came into your home and started seeing some of your collection, I noticed that your early passions were like Monet and Picasso, and it sort of leaked over into Remington and Russell. And today, your passion has grown into so many other areas that I've already mentioned, such as Western art and the War of 1812. Where does this passion to collect come from?
Probably comes from the fact that my mother was an artist. My father had a modest art collection. My first serious girlfriend in college was an artist. And it comes from, besides my exposure to it, from other things. I like to look at a painting or look at something that makes me feel good. You know, life has a lot of traumas in it, a lot of bad things happen to everybody, but it's always wonderful to look at something or talk to someone that make you feel good. And also then I got more and deeply involved in it, and I said, if you look at a painting that's really outstanding, you could see that the love of what the artist was doing, either for the object or in the process of making it. If you taste a great wine, you could taste the love the vintner has in it. If you look at a house and someone built it who was a master and loved working with his hands, you could see that. And to me, you know, having love for something is highly important to all of us. And when I look at my children, you know, they're the best things in the world to love. Hopefully they'll love you back.
I'm sure they do. You know, Bill, many people that follow you know that you are an extraordinary wine collector. I think all three of your primary wine cellars that are beautiful have been on the covers of the Wine Spectator. And you also are the subject of a book called Billionaire's Vinegar. You discovered that you were sold phony wine. And even though the people that sold you that wine offered to buy it back, you refused. What was that all about?
Very simple. You know, as I said, great wine, you could taste the love in it. And when someone tells you fake wine, they're desecrating that feeling. And to me, that's extremely vile and unethical behavior. Unfortunately, it's a standard practice. You know, there are bad people in this world, but if you don't hold them accountable, that just will cause that type of activity to proliferate.
So you thought they'd just resell the wine?
Of course, what they would do, they'd buy it back from me, or they give me money back, and then they take the bottle and they dump it on to another guy, saying, well, here's another sucker. To me, that was a sacrilege.
Well, speaking of suckers, there was a bet against you winning the America's Cup. We were talking earlier about, I thought it was 1,000 to 1, you thought it was 100 to 1, but it didn't matter. But Las Vegas, when you announced that you were, as a neophyte, going to take on the America's Cup in the world, they put pretty good odds up there.
Oh yeah, you know, that was probably one of the dumbest things I didn't do. I had faith that we'd win. In fact, I said in my heart we're going to win, in my head we're going to win, but I didn't bet on myself. If I'd done that, I would have paid for the whole thing.
You know, most people wouldn't know, but you have a PhD and a master's. PhD, I believe, is chemical engineering from,
Yes.
From MIT. And I think your thesis, your doctoral thesis, was on fluid flow.
Yes, it
That
was.
certainly doesn't qualify you to win the America's Cup. But I guess the question is, how does a guy, you called yourself, and not me now, you called yourself an MIT nerd. So how does a kid from Kansas, from Wichita, Kansas, whose father's an engineer, how does he go from there and becomes an MIT nerd, and the next thing you know, he's competing in, I think you won 4 world championships before you tried the America's Cup. How does that happen? Where does the connection go?
Well, everybody thought I was crazy. A hick from Kansas going into sailing. Sailing became a huge passion of my life for a period of time. Still is, but one of the things that, see, I had this, it was in the family genes and blood, you know, because my mother's ancestor was Captain Lawrence, who said, don't give up the ship. My father, when he was 19 years old, even though he was born in this tiny little West Texas town, ran away from home and shipped out on a tramp steamer around the world. Came back and would tell us these stories about his adventures. Maybe then my father had a ranch in Kansas on the prairie. It was then actually the Flint Hills, which were rolling like this, not a tree on them. And there was tall blue stem grass growing on it. Actually, if you look at the grass, it had a green base, a blue stem, and then a brown top, and it would get up to 4 or 5 feet high. Well, when I was a kid, I'd sit up on this hill, and I could see the puffs of wind dancing all over the grass and on these rolling hills. You could see it because you could follow the change in colors. And I would pretend up there, you know, I was captain of a ship in the War of 1812, or I was chasing pirates, or I was a pirate. I always had this fascination with the sea. Then when I got to MIT, or actually I went to a military school, and they said I wasn't smart enough to get in, but I had to go to the summer school, and they had a Naval Academy there, and I joined it and just loved it. So when I got to where I could afford a big boat, I looked at it and bought a big sailboat, went out and raced it, came in dead last a number of times. I said, I got to figure out what's going on here. How can I apply what I've learned at MIT? So I set up a research program at MIT on what makes a boat go fast. It turns out that boat speed is a science. It's a function of aerodynamics and hydrodynamics. But having a good crew, that's a function of teamwork, everybody getting along. After I won a couple world championships with this fast new boat that we had designed at MIT, people wanted my technology. I remember once Dennis Conner said, Bill, give me your technology. And I said, well, what's in it for me? And he said, well, you can have breakfast with the crew. I said, well, thank you, Dennis. Some other people came to me and said, give me your technology, and by the way, give me $20 million. And I said, well, why should I finance your ego trip? Why don't I finance my own? I finally said, I've got something of value here. I didn't know how much it was worth, so I said, I might as well do it myself. So that's what got me into it.
But money and a good idea and a brilliant education and all of that doesn't win America's cups. That's a lot of that is what?
Well, winning it takes a number of things. The first is leadership. And the leader has to understand what really is necessary to win. And what's necessary is a fast boat. I've studied all the races of the America's Cup, and found out slow boats don't win. Now, when I told this to a couple of people who won it, they laughed at me and said, Bill, if you give me a slower boat, I'll outsail the other SOB, kind of a macho patent type of thing. But I looked at it and said, no, slow boats don't win. That's self-evident. And boat speed is, as I said, is a function of aerodynamics and hydrodynamics. It's a science. So you approach it from a scientific point of view. They said, but on the other hand, they said, you get a yacht designer, and a great yacht designer, and he'll design you the best boat. Well, I found yacht designers were more artists than they were scientists, and they designed a boat that looked beautiful, that looked fast, and felt fast. I looked at it and said, I don't care how it looks. I don't care how it feels. All I care about is how fast it goes through the water, because that's what it takes to win. So we did use yacht designers, but we put a scientist in charge. The next issue, when I found out about when I studied the America's Cup yachts, was that the team that wins is not the one that sails the most brilliantly. It's the one that makes the fewer mistakes. It's like in tennis. Hit the ball back, let the other guy make the mistake. And the way you eliminate mistakes is practice, practice, practice. And teamwork, teamwork, teamwork. Then finally, the last thing that wins it is good management. You want to do everything well. Repair the boat. Have the right uniforms so they don't catch cold or catch pneumonia if a storm comes through. Have the right food because first of all, you need a lot of energy to do it, and secondly, you don't want the crew to catch diarrhea during the race and it falls apart. So you got to do everything well. If you do those things, and then lastly, you got to raise enough money to pay for it all.
Well, without regard for raising of the money, is there a lesson in here for the midshipmen? How a guy from Kansas and MIT and a neophyte steps into the world stage and wins a race that Las Vegas City had no chance to win?
Not only Las Vegas, but all the experts. All the experts and all the other competitors, they considered us jokes, buffoons, etc., etc. But the trick is, again, is to figure out what it takes to win for success, ignoring all the traditions, ignoring all the perceptions about it, and then apply your energies to put together a team and the resources that you will need to get either a fast boat or to get a success. You just have to, mainly it's using your head, thinking the problem through, and then being able to attract and keep and motivate the right people.
I want to move over to a passion that you have, which I know from personal experience, and it relates to education, leadership, and ethics, and you've been talking about those things, and you apply them to not only your personal life, but your corporate life. Do you believe that the study of history that you have undertaken your whole life, do you believe that's had an impact?
Oh, absolutely.
On your business?
Yes, absolutely.
Futurists would say that if you read and look at history, it holds you back. Is that your experience?
No, I would say something differently. I would say traditions hold you back. You look at Steve Jobs and Apple. Everybody wants music. But he broke it down and said, look, let's have the computer deliver music to them so they could carry it around all the time. Well, and he broke a lot of traditions doing that because people were using computers to do calculations or write books or something. And I think that was, brilliant on his part.
Over the years, Bill, I've watched you distribute books, required reading. You did it to the crew of 92. You've done it with your executives in your company. One book that I recommend, and they're historic books. And you're also fond of quoting from historic characters. I recall one book you gave the America's Cup crew was Cooperation.
Yes.
And you often tell the story of the prisoner's dilemma. Is there something in here that the midshipmen at the Naval Academy, the men and women, can learn from that?
Absolutely. It's very difficult to achieve something solely on your own. You need a team to achieve it. To have a team, you need the people to cooperate with one another. That's an essential part of life. If you're in war, you want everyone cooperating. But people have different agendas. I had a case where I had one crew member who wanted to be skipper. And so he spent more time fighting to become skipper than he did in trying to win the race. So you've got to line people's agendas up. So we're all pulling on the same rope in the same direction.
At or about the time that you were visiting the Naval Academy, you were in the process of forming, which is now in operation, full operation, a private high school called Oxbridge. Did you learn anything at the Naval Academy from Admiral Miller, Colonel Atkins, anyone at the Academy that affected the mission for that school?
Oh, absolutely. I learned it's extremely important to teach ethics. It's extremely important to teach teamwork and cooperation. It's extremely important to teach kids how to solve problems, how to take a project and make it into reality. And it's extremely important to have a good, competent staff and treat them properly and motivate them properly.
Well, Naval Academy's chairman of the Stockdale Ethics and Leadership Department, Colonel Athens, he asked you if he could look at your mission and comment on it, didn't he?
He sure did, and I asked him to help us with it, and he did a great job. Also, I'll tell you, I found a great asset at the Academy, who is Bob Parsons, the deputy superintendent, and I said, this man has the leadership, the character and the ethics that I need, and the vision to think outside the box and break tradition. And so it took me a while to get him, but I quartered it. And now he's head of the school, CEO of the school, and he's been doing a magnificent job.
So there's a legacy here, I guess, again for Bill Koch, that relates to leadership and ethics in a high school program. And what's that? I said there's a legacy here.
Yes.
That you are creating.
I'm creating it, but we're modeled a lot of it after the Naval Academy. And ethics is very important to how you get along with other people. It's essential to good cooperation.
I'd like to sort of wind down this interview by talking about the War of 1812 exhibit. The exhibit dates are April 1 or thereabout to November of 2013. It's in Mahan Hall. And as you learned, Mahan Hall is adorned by battle flags from the War of 1812, ironically. And you and I didn't know that. I didn't realize it, certainly, until we went there and saw these magnificent big cases. It's a pretty appropriate venue. The Naval Academy never asked you for anything, and yet you, after listening to them and looking, you generously said, I want to see your budget. You looked at the budget and said, I'll pay for this. What is it that motivated you to do that?
Well, you know, on the several trips that we had to the Naval Academy, and the one trip that they came down here, that Bob Parsons and brought Cheevers and a few other people down, and they looked at my collection. And they were quite, and I looked at their collection. And we both came to the same conclusion that having these two collections together would be absolutely marvelous, even though we have different objectives. And I think in those conversations, they came up with the idea that they were going to have a War of 1812 exhibit to celebrate the war. At the time, I guess the war actually started, which was what, in 1814, I think.
13 probably.
Yeah. And yeah, that's right, 1813. And it just was self-evident to me that best way to do it would be to show my stuff as well as their stuff, because they had some holes and I have some holes in our collections. And I looked at it and said, this would be a wonderful thing to do. So to get it started, I said, why don't we, I don't know whether I said it or they said it, but it came out of a conversations. And then they were, as a lot of people do now, saying, well, we're not sure we have the money for it. And I said, look, to me, it's so important to recognize the importance of the War of 1812 that I'd be happy to pay for it and supplement it if you guys manage the exhibit. But the War of 1812 to me is gets back to this thing of separating perception from reality. The Revolutionary War wasn't quite it was a revolutionary war, but it did not establish America. America at that time was very weak, was right after the Revolutionary War, was very dependent upon Britain for trade, and had a lot of internal dissent, a lot of it. All the states wanted to go their own directions. And Britain at the time was fighting Napoleon. So they weren't, they looked upon America as kind of a backwater. But they started using America as a source of supply for sailors and to get all the trade out of it. And one other thing that most people don't know about, the British were insisting that only British ships could transport goods from one American port to the other. And so finally, President Madison got fed up with that, declared war on it, and we fought Britain. The war actually ended up in a tie. Britain thought they won it, we thought we won it. But the wonderful thing about it is it established that America could stand on her own feet and fight the most powerful nation in the world and not be defeated. What America wanted was to have free trade, its citizens respected, and its borders be respected as well, and that it could compete in the real world, economically as well as spiritually and any other way that it wanted to. It was up to America to make its own destiny. Britain at the time, I'm sure, if they hadn't been fighting Napoleon, in fact, when Britain was invading New Orleans, they wanted to basically take the colonies back, put it into the British Empire. But the fact that America resisted that, it solved its own internal problems and said, you mess with us, you're messing with it. What's that old, there was a flag that once said,
Don't tread on me.
Don't tread on me, and it was a snake. You're going to get bit if you mess with us. And I think that was wonderful.
Bill, I have seen in your personal life with your children and your business, you're always striving to separate perception, or what I would call myth, from reality. And you study history, I know, in part to do that. Were you able to discover any myth or perception in your study of the War of 1812 that you hope to dispel?
Well, the most important thing was that I think the War of 1812 was the second American Revolution. It's the one that established America as an independent force in the world and as a true nation. That to me, I think it was equally important as the American Revolution. It's going from infancy to adulthood. And that was the adulthood step. I also think it dispels a myth that Britain was just interested in trade. Well, Britain was interested in dominating America. I mean, they were an empire, and they tried to stay an empire up until after World War II, and they lost this part of the empire. I think it showed, unfortunately, how ruthless people can be in war, how devastating they could be to one another, which I think is a lesson that we should all learn to try to avoid war if we can. But I think it also established that America, to get along in the world, they had to have different people with different economic interests cooperating together. There was a movement for the New England states to succeed from it because they wanted to keep the trade going with Britain. They didn't want to have a war with Britain. But America was able, or the government, Madison was able to work through all that stuff, to work through all the different agendas that each group of people had, so that we would have together we could do much more than we could separately.
Well, I know that this is going to be a world-class exhibit that both you and the Naval Academy, Admiral Miller, is going to be so proud of. There's no question about it, and you should be. I learned, and I told you recently, that what you wanted to do, which was to create a book to memorialize that exhibit, and you hands-on picked paintings and thought about what should be shown, and that book grew to be 275 pages, if you will. I make the mistake of calling it a coffee table book because it's so pretty. However, you learned recently that the history department at the Naval Academy, who was asked to look at it for authenticity, had decided to make it a text so that every midshipman going through that class will have that book. How did that make you feel?
I was absolutely delighted and extremely proud to have just a little bit of influence on that. because I think my purpose of this exhibit is to show the real history of the United States, an important event in the real history, and that book will establish that. Establish it not only in the form of art, but also in the form of historical context. And the nice thing about the book being as beautiful as it is, with all the painting and stuff, it'll attract people's eyes to it. And then from that, they'll read something about it. And from that, they'll learn more about our history. You know, what's the old saying? If you don't know from whence you came, you won't know from where you're going.
You know, Bill, one final comment I want to make is, and people don't know this, but as that book project grew and it grew, you had your hand on the tiller, so to speak. It became very expensive, and it certainly exceeded any budgetary item, and you then very generously agreed to donate money to the Naval Academy Foundation so that book could be something that would last, a part of the Naval Academy and this exhibit's legacy. It was very generous of you. Well,
I appreciate that, but it's small compared to what the Naval Academy is doing. And I got to thank Admiral Miller. You know, he's wholeheartedly taken on this exhibit, and he's allowed the people involved in it to break some museum traditions and to make the exhibit entertaining to the public. I think that is a terrific marketing tool, because if you just write a dull history book, people aren't going to read it. But if you make it attractive and you make it so people can relate to it and see what it was like being there, then they get interested in the history. And
well,
that preserves then, you know, what America stands for. You know, the individualism of America, the cooperation of it, our attitude, you know, the frontier spirit. You work together, you help your neighbor, and you stand your ground.
Well, and you certainly helped your neighbor, the Naval Academy. Bill, this started with my kind of clumsy attempt to see whether or not within the 50,000 swords I believe they have in their storage, whether or not deep within there somewhere was Captain Lawrence's sword. I take it you haven't found the sword yet, am I right?
No, I haven't found it. It's still my Excalibur, but I haven't found it.
And of course, there's a lot of people that are reading and watching this that have a passionate interest in the Naval Academy and the War of 1812, and just maybe someone out there knows where it is. So I take it you're not giving up the sword.
I'm not giving up, and I'm not giving up the ship.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.